Hello and welcome to season 6, episode 5 of Dualistic Unity. I am enjoying the experience of being where I'm at and focusing wholeheartedly, paying attention to the entirety of what that means and everything that's happening right now. And I'm finding that the more my focus is here, the more there is, the more fullness there is in my experience. And it's, of course, always the case, but especially paying extra close attention to what's going on. There tends to be a flow to things, and I'm enjoying seeing a little bit more of that recently.
I am likewise enjoying the turning of the tide. And I say this after 20 years, but for me, as several of you know, my journey started after a long road of just darkness, just self-loathing and feeling alone, not having a support structure, being suicidal for a long period of time. And then in the depths of all of that, realizing that not even death was really an option, because surely there had to be something that we could do with all of this stuff that we had been through, coming to find a moment of awakening. And for the longest time, I could not communicate that awakening was psychedelically assisted because there was such a stigma against it. To say, well, I ate a couple of grams of mushrooms and I looked at my whole damn life and realized that I was carrying a story with me from moment to moment to moment. That was the weight. To realize that in a moment and have an entire night of just revelation at how much I was carrying, how much I was willingly carrying because I thought it was important. To not be able to share that simply because people are like, oh, you're taking drugs. Oh, you're just getting high. That's all you're doing. It's disheartening. And so for me, it was about trying to find a conversation where we could share the insights that you find on psychedelics without necessarily having to promote the psychedelics. Because as anybody who is on this path will tell you, you don't need the psychedelics, but sometimes they can remind you of a door that you may have forgotten about. And so it's very encouraging now to be able to have this conversation openly, to be able to talk to people about psychedelics, to be able to show people that, well, you're going to a doctor and you're taking things that are basically created by people without long-term testing, as opposed to trusting nature that has evolved beside us. And we're 50% mushroom in our DNA. Like, it seems odd not to trust that to some degree. And so it's great to be able to have this conversation. And that's why I am especially excited about this episode. Today, we are joined by Justin Townsend. He is the CEO of Myco Meditations. This is a meditative psychedelic retreat that is ongoing throughout the year. It's very exciting that this exists. And so, Justin, I'm very excited to have you join us today. Thank you for being here. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found Myco Meditations and whatever else, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invite having me on the show. And it's going to be nice for me to talk about, we always say that we're a science, evidence, research-based retreat and how we approach things. And it's a Western contemporary therapeutic model. So that's a model within which we operate, but nevertheless, the nature of our guests' experiences doesn't easily always fit within the science, evidence, research-based positioning and approach towards psychedelics. So I tend to have to stick more with that other stuff, but I think today we'll come up with some good insights and some of the experiences that we witnessed down here that will maybe add to the conversation. So I am not your typical psychedelic practitioner. I've had two very distinct and separate paths in life. One was my above board 25-year plus corporate career. The other one below the board and off the radar was my psychedelic and career that included a lot of breath work as well. And so had a few experiences with mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms in my late teens, scared myself silly a few times. But more than luck than by judgment, I realized it was having a significant impact on my chronic depression and chronic anxiety, and was beginning to ameliorate a lot of that. Fast forward a meditation practice, fast forward a deep, deep interest in the human psyche, both collectively and individually. This led to a period of time in Germany where I learned breath work, ended up teaching breathwork and then helping to facilitate breathwork retreats, all on the down low. In the year 2000, my very first ayahuasca experience that began my work really in the more shamanic approach. This was part of the European psychedelic underground movement. We were flying in medicine men and medicine women from overseas, pairing them up with great clinicians at the time that were also doing underground work. And so I would not for one moment claim that I've had anything remotely resembling a shamanic apprenticeship or lineage. It's been just a 20-year plus apprenticeship with working with great clinicians, great medicine men, great medicine women. And then I joined Myco Meditations in 2017 as an advisor, and then over time became CEO. And now it's myself and my business partner, Mike, that own and operate Myco. I'd certainly say back in the original days, 2014, 15, it was very much the wild, wild west. It was not a therapeutic model, but it also wasn't a recreational model. It was more like an experiential type model for those that were curious. Retreats were sporadic. And so we took a long, hard look at what was happening in the US on the state level, on the FDA level, nationally, and wanted to build a retreat center that, as I said, is a Western contemporary model, and develop vocabulary and language over time and an approach towards psychedelics that we think is the optimal fit for the average Westerner coming out of Europe or the US. And I think that's what we've arrived at now.
That's incredible. That's really cool. I'm curious a little bit about the balance that you found between the research and the shamanic approach, I think is referenced on the website, and how that balance is sort of found between, having a structure and a rigidity around. I know there's some semblance of a structure to your retreats, but also having that feel and sensitivity for the individuals that are there. Because I'm sure a lot of people who come are very different experiences, looking for different things out of the retreat. So I'm just curious about how you guys are able to find that and maintain that balance.
So I'd say, first of all, that the shamanic approach is valid when you work with a shaman, medicine man or a medicine woman that has this in their lineage and has been through the apprenticeship and trained up. But if you take a psychedelic like ayahuasca, the foundations for its use are working with occult and spiritual forces. Okay. And my firm belief is that unless you have been truly enculturated and raised within that native belief system, that there's only a certain amount of efficacy that something like ayahuasca can have psychologically. I think neurologically it absolutely can, but when it comes to the interpretation of the psychological material that arises, that interpretation will likely happen through the lens of the shaman, and it won't always be appropriate to the Western mindset. And so we won't use words like ceremony or ritual. We don't dress up in ayahuasca print pants or have any kind of clothing on that somehow displays, hey, look at us, we work in the psychedelic space. In my mind, if a therapist shows up down here to work for us that's got ayahuasca print pants and dream catcher earrings, and they're going around wafting incense sticks and going namaste, they're likely going to be on the next plane home, because that just tells me that you are looking for an identity and you're just probably playing ego games with yourself. What we look for in our practitioners down here is the gray man or the gray woman, someone that is quietly confident about their therapeutic and healing skills and doesn't need to consistently advertise that to the world around them. And so we've developed protocols. We've looked at what was done in the 60s and 70s inside research institutes and outside of research institutes. We've taken a look at Johns Hopkins protocols for best practices, Yale, MAPS, and most of that is really designed for a therapist-patient relationship that's one-on-one, or maybe two therapists, one patient. So we took the best of those practices and developed them further for group work. And so we are structured in what we do, but I wouldn't say we're rigid in what we do, because when you're working in this space, you never know how a client is going to respond to psychedelics. So 1 foot in the known and 1 foot in the unknown across 12 different guests, right, at any given retreat, and very much be ready to work with whatever comes up. And so we apply an eclectic range of different therapeutic modalities. some of which can be top down, very cognitive, but most of which are bottom up, are somatic. One of our more common therapeutic methods we use down here is called internal family systems. And that's not about your family. This is about the family of parts that exist within the psyche, some of which are exiled, some of which are front and present, some of which can blend with us and we become them and they take our lives over. So parts work is an aspect of what we do along with somatic therapy as well. A retreat is 7 days long. We have 3 dosing days with a dose every other day. Each dose is followed by group integration therapy. And the goal of that integration is twofold. It's to help clients understand and integrate the material that has arisen out of their unconscious minds that was often heretofore unavailable to their conscious mind, to help them integrate that into their awareness, and then understand how they might deploy that when they get back home. But I think the other layer of integration is encouraging everyone to live an integrative life, one of authenticity, so that there's as little light possible shining between how you seem to be, how you actually are, and how you present to the world. And that move towards authenticity is certainly a big part of the work we do down here as well.
That's fantastic. That's well, it's the core of what our podcast is all about. With this discussion is we do groups 5 days a week online. We have events ourselves where we get together and very much just talk about the reasons that we aren't that relaxed, authentic self most of the time.
Yeah.
And so our audience is very much primed for a psychedelic experience in a lot of ways. And some of them have already had that experience for that reason, because there's a lesson there. There really is,
Yeah.
in terms of sensitivity, especially. And I can tell just by the balance that you're trying to establish between, being on the scientific side, but also being conscious, because that's really what it's about. That's the lesson of the psychedelic, is
Yep.
to be present and follow your sensitivity. And so I have to ask, because I know over the 7 days of the retreat, you stagger the doses every second day, and you're using psychedelic mushrooms, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Do any of your staff also use psychedelics during the retreat? Because the reason I ask is because there is that connection that can be possible, as well as, of course, the reassurance of like, don't worry, I'm on it too, and I'm fine.
Yeah. So that's a very good question. And certainly originally we did used to do that in recognizance of how effective psychedelics are as an empathy tool when you're working with them in the space, how well we can connect and be in the space with our guests. But I would say a couple of reasons why we stopped doing it. One can rely too heavily on the psychedelics to give you the intuitive insight that you need. And we'd much rather that our team members develop that clinical human intuition on their own, is the first thing. And we're certainly seeing that happen. Secondarily, I'd say a number of guests, when they found out that both the retreat leader and, say, one of the therapists, typically a female versus a male, were taking psychedelics, they become a bit alarmed. And so that caused some consternation for them. But admittedly, once we'd worked with them and they saw what it was like, that alarm dissipated quite substantially. I guess the final thing is this, is that we are operating in a space that is very much under the microscope, right? There's all sorts of different positions being held from different groups within the psychedelic industry that want to be the gatekeepers, they believe their way of doing this is the best way. And therefore, we're open to a lot of criticism. And we've spent years building this company and getting it to a place where we have the pedigree and the track record now that we've arrived at, with a big focus on safety and efficacy. By the end of this year, we will have served around 2,000 guests, approximately 6,000 doses of psilocybin. And I think that the benefit of some of my team members working with psychedelics versus the potential perception issue that would arise is just not worth that kind of cost risk situation. So, and we're doing fine without it. I mean, what I can tell you these days is that often when I'm approaching a guest and I get within a few feet of them, I'm starting to pick up already on the waves that are happening in the space, their energetic presence, what's happening within them. And if they're feeling a bit nauseous and are about to purge, I will begin to feel a bit nauseous. And so there's all sorts of connections that do get built. You don't get the same clarity as you would working with mushrooms in your system, which would only be a 2 or 3 gram dose anyway, for us as retreat leaders and lead therapists. But no, we decided not to. But it's a very good question. And that's the honest answer as to why.
It's totally fair. And again, given, the legal considerations, as well as, again, reassurance, not necessarily for the guests so much as the system that we have to live within, right?
Yes.
And the common perception that people have about this, they're very nervous. They're very afraid because, again, psychedelics take away that sense of control, and we run on that so much, right? So I love the fact that you're mentioning that you can feel that just by coming within proximity, because that is very much a big part of that experience, is you do develop that sensitivity. In terms of dosages, I read on the website that you increase dosages by about a 0.5 gram typically. Is that the same for everyone?
That's I feel you may have misread.
Probably.
No, we actually, so we are known for high dosing, number one. And the main thing is we're not a wellness retreat, though we do have some wellness candidates come down. We are predominantly working with mental health, so depression, anxiety, PTSD, all manner of trauma, childhood sexual abuse. And we're often dealing with some very acute and intractable mental health conditions. People that are in their 70s that have suffered with treatment-resistant depression for 30 or 40 years, or chronic PTSD and chronic anxiety. And just by virtue of the duration and often how ossified, if you like, their neural pathways are, this requires large doses to get things shifting within the brain. And so it's by no means a competition, but a typical first look. What I'd say is this about psilocybin: there is no one size fits all when it comes to psilocybin. The scientists are beginning to realize that now, and so they're defining a range of dose, but we've always known that for years. And so we do a 3-dose protocol because the first dose allows our guests to dip their toe in the psychedelic waters for the first time in the shallow end, and allows our team to assess their tolerance and sensitivity. Okay, so that's dose 1. That could be in the 3 to 4 to 5 gram range. The second dose, we will dial in a lot more accurately, and then we're looking to be somewhere between a low of 6 or 7, but could be up to 10 grams or even more in the second dose. If we get a substantial shift achieved in that second dose, maybe we'll remain at that same amount for the third dose, maybe drop down, but it's not uncommon by the end of the retreat for quite a few of our guests to be up into the low to mid-teens, so as high as 14 or 15 grams of psilocybin. And we grow and cultivate our own mushrooms here. We have a lab in Jamaica that I'll send batches to for testing, and we're looking just to prove there's no fecal matter from the cultivation process, that there's no heavy metals, but most importantly, to understand the potency, so the psilocybin and psilocin content. So I know that what we're working with down here is it's at least at a minimum clinical grade potency, if not more. Aside from people having acute, intractable mental health issues, another case would come to mind where we have people down that are very cerebral and intellectual and are maybe low on the emotional quotient. And one of our goals is to target the default mode network in the brain so that all the inner chatter wears off, right? And people can be more in the present moment. What we're seeing is that the more intellectual, the higher the IQ, the more analytical they are, especially at the cost of the emotional side. These types of people generally tend to require higher doses to target that default mode network effectively. And that could easily be 10 to 12 grams.
Wow. That's pretty incredible. And I can see the, impact of that, and just having such a high dose too, and the potential there. And so I'm curious, when, you're talking about these things, going through these experiences, how much of the communication process with guests is surrounding the recognition that this is them, this is still them, and it's not necessarily the mushrooms? Because I could imagine someone having a very freeing experience, oftentimes we can pin certain things on the drug, on the substance, on the thing. And so how do you balance, especially with such high doses, the recognition like, oh no, this is still you, this isn't something you need to rely upon for your life, but this is actually what you are beyond, you know, the stories that you keep telling yourself,
Okay.
the
Okay.
things that you're holding on to?
That's a good question. So we do a lot of psychoeducation, okay? Because we acknowledge that our guests can have very personal experiences related to their lives, their traumas, their life experiences. Um, if they transcend that, they can have a metaphysical, philosophical type experience, and then they transcend that into the mysteries of the cosmological. Okay, and there's no telling. We have to be careful when we're dosing throughout the week that we give them the right amount so that they don't just transcend all the shadow material work that they need to work upon. That can easily happen, okay? So they can almost bypass what they came to work on if you gave them too high a dose too soon, and they would end up in some mystical experience and experiencing the oneness of everything. So there's a lot of explanation and talk and education that's done around that. Um, Undoubtedly, the majority of the work done down here is relevant to their personal lives and the experiences that they've had. But typically, it's not, around about 40% of our guests have a mystical experience of one kind or another. And we know that because following each dose, we send them the nationally recognized mystical experience questionnaire. And that helps us assess whether they had a mystical experience or not. And that's important to us because the research shows if you have a mystical experience, the long-term psychological outcomes are much better. So that's a reason to have it, even if science doesn't understand the hard question of consciousness and probably won't do for a long time yet. So we don't try and impose any top-down belief systems upon our guests. We do have a menu, if you like, of different frameworks of understanding so that when our guests have these types of experiences that go beyond the personal and into the enchanted mystical aspect of everything, we can give them different frameworks. We will help them build scaffolding around their experience, but it's up to them to create the meaning out of that as well. And so the mystical experience can manifest in myriad different ways that we've witnessed, from full ego dissolution and immersion into the oneness of everything. But at the same time, that can be very liberating for many of our guests. They remember who they are, or it's quite uncommon. It's quite common to say, "This feels very familiar to me," or "It feels like home," or "This seems more real than this daily reality that I'm normally immersed in." Okay. But if you've had a very rigid, impoverished worldview, and let's say you're a material reductionist and fully atheist, and then you have this kind of experience, it's going to turn your worldview upon its head about the nature of reality, and the epistemic trust that you had in how reality in the world functions is suddenly turned upon its head. And that can be a little bit disconcerting for some. So it's not all just love and light the whole time when people are having mystical experiences. And we have to be careful about the language we use in how we put this forward, and then the support that we need. But for the most part, it's not just a cognitive understanding of a mystical experience. What comes out of this is a deeply embodied knowledge about what they've experienced during that trip that will remain with them for the rest of their lives. Even if it moves off to the periphery, they've got a deep sense of what they experience, and they've rediscovered the magic and the enchantment that exists in the world. And I think that infuses into their life continually after that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a question in regards to the higher dosages and then the integration days. What does an integration day typically entail? I know you have quite a bit of staff. I know that you have quite a few people with a lot of expertise. What would you expect after, say, the first dose in terms of an integration day follow-up conversation?
Right. So we always caution that, the first dose can be underwhelming, and we expect it to be underwhelming. And yet some people will have very powerful experiences on that first dose. And then next day we're sitting into integration, and most people have had some kind of experience, but there may be one that's still sitting there that it didn't move the needle, and they're scowling at me or the retreat leader, and going through their mind is, well, maybe I'm going to be the one person that psilocybin doesn't work for, right? So we reassure them and we get them to where they need to be. So that first integration experience, they're going to sit in the group. It's not just about sharing your experience. That isn't to say that sharing isn't meaningful and that it's not substantial, but that's not group therapy, okay? The art of a good lead in group therapist is to work with the dynamic and tension that's arising in the room, to tease out certain aspects of the guest experience for them, and then to use that to illuminate, if you like, the rest of the guests there, so they get more insight into their own narratives and maybe their own mental health conditions and that kind of thing as well. Now, we always have question sets, and the question set for each guest is, how many grams did you take? Was any cannabis needed to launch? And sometimes there is a catalyst. We don't get people baked, but sometimes 2 or 3 hits on a joint is enough to send them off, especially after an hour and 20 minutes. What was the trip in a nutshell, right? What was the overarching message or meaning of this trip? What are some key details that arose for you out of that trip? And then any new takeaways the next day, because you've slept on it, you processed it. How are you feeling about it this morning? And then it depends upon what came up in the experience. We have many guests that come down here with childhood sexual abuse, about 35 to 40% as a minimum, male and female. For many of those individuals, their application form might say female, 50 years old, high functioning, good career, cycling through some unhealthy relationship patterns, maybe a poor relationship with alcohol, and depression, right? And then typically by the second dose, they're starting to recover the memories of a traumatic event. And at the same time, their body is going through catharsis and is processing the physiological and emotional response to that trauma, which, if it was a rape scenario, maybe feelings of disgust, powerlessness, contamination, fear, etc., etc. So, as you can probably imagine, we have people down here from all walks of life, all sorts of life experiences, from people that have witnessed murders, had attempted murders on them, on their family, have survived plane crashes, have been to war, and so all manner of buried, repressed memory and material starts to come to the surface. These therapeutic sessions can be quite emotional. We have to ensure, everybody that's been through a trauma has the potential to have a trauma vortex within themselves. Our goal is to scoop in and scoop out of that vortex gently. If we allow them to immerse fully into that trauma vortex, they can begin to fail emotional self-regulation, lose track of what they're talking about, and even develop some flu-like symptoms due to all the chemicals being released biologically. So I guess that was a long answer to a short question. I hope that answered it for you.
That was ideal. Absolutely. Because it really does give you a kind of a full perspective of what you can expect in between these experiences, because they can be quite jarring. I had no idea that you were dealing with dosages quite as high as you are. That is a transformative experience. How do you find that translates into their lives afterwards? Do you have people coming back to the retreats, or do you have people who keep in touch with you and say, hey, I'm still microdosing, say, for example?
Absolutely. So before the guests arrive here, we create a retreat WhatsApp group. And the purpose of that is break the ice, get to know each other a bit, upload your pet photographs, whatever you're going to do, that's all fine. We use that WhatsApp group throughout the week just for organizational stuff that we have to do. Hey, dinner time, massages, etc. At the end of the retreat, that WhatsApp group stays alive. And then they also get put into a Myco Meditations worldwide WhatsApp group. Then we have regional groups as well. And then for big cities like New York, Boston, Denver, we have other groups. They're always meeting up with each other, supporting each other post-retreat and getting together as well. So that's how we deal with all of that communication. As to the frequency, some do choose to come back, and you're never going to work on a lifetime's worth of repressed material in 7 days in Jamaica, but you'll work on enough that you can go back largely transformed by the end of the week, minus most, if not all, your depression or anxiety, minus all of your repressed heavy emotions that you've been carrying most of your lifetime. And to quote Jimmy Cliff, I can see clearly now the rain has gone. I can see all the obstacles in my way. Literally, you've been taken to the top of the mountain. You can see where you came from, why you are who you are, and where you are now. You can look ahead a bit, but nobody can remain at the top of the mountain in this ecstatic, all-seeing state. You've got to come back down the mountain, put your backpack on, get back into the daily grind, then begin. And that's where the work continues, right? relationships, romantic, business, personal, changing maladaptive behaviors and habits. That takes effort. That can also seem a bit counterintuitive when you first start to implement it, but typically they'll come back if they need to after 12 to 18 months, typically.
That's awesome. Cause yeah, that peak isn't even what it's all about. Like we talk about this quite a bit on the podcast, just how much we're informed by the stuff we go through by being in quote unquote the shit, like how much empathy is derived from that. If someone never goes through anything, and even through an experience like this, it's not to say that, there's not going to be anything else that comes up in your life. It's just you have a shifted enough perspective that you can handle those sorts of things.
Exactly.
Like what's the quote? Don't pray for an easy life, pray for the strength to handle a hard one.
Yeah.
And I think that experiences like this can certainly inform that. But it's interesting too. I love how you guys are able to keep in touch, because that's very much what we try to do with everything that we're doing with podcasts and retreats and community, and just how much, the world, society, reality is looking for that community, and how we've gotten connected in certain ways, and the ability to communicate and get in touch regarding certain retreats like this, or via social media, and utilize all of those things. But simultaneously, we've gotten far, far more disconnected from each other, and hiding from each other. And so it's a beautiful thing to see these experiences shift people's reality. And so I'm curious with your own experience, because I know you have dealt with anxiety, depression, and so how much of that, and how much of, your own psychedelic use has informed your sensitivity, your own sort of drive to be involved in a situation like this, and just a little bit of your background, be it with some anxiety, depression, and then your utilization of things like psilocybin to assist those experiences.
It's been absolutely core and fundamental to who I am today, undoubtedly, unquestionably. Obviously, the breathwork practices helped with some of that. The meditation helped with some of that, but I would put it largely down to the psychedelics lifting the veil, showing me who I truly am, both in my dark shadow and in my golden shadow of my personality, in my unconscious, presenting me with that so that I had to integrate it. I would also say, though, Ray spoke about some of the misery that he'd been through and suicidal at times. One thing you can probably relate to here is that, most of the wisdom that I have has not been absent misery and suffering. Okay, the wisdom that I've gained. And I truly, truly believe that most of the wisdom that we can glean from life is by going through our own suffering and then emerging out the other side. I'll often say to our guests that the despair you've all felt or do feel, despair is suffering without meaning. And it sounds to me like what Ray has done and what I've done myself is I'm no longer a victim of malicious forces and events and my own unconscious, etc. in my life. I've taken responsibility for it, and I've given meaning to my suffering. And certainly when we're working with clients down here with chronic PTSD, it's a really important part of their healing that they move into taking responsibility for who they are today, and then saying, how do I create meaning now for myself and ideally for others out of the suffering that I've been through, whether it's in a small way or a big way. And I think that's a core part of the equation to this work as well.
I absolutely have to agree. One thing that we've encountered quite a few times in our discussions is just this recognition that, oh, I wouldn't be able to empathize with people going through something similar if I didn't go through this, right?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like a superpower. I've said this to people before, that because I've gone through my own stuff, but people have gone through things that I'll never go through. And thus they have access to insights and an ability to empathize that I can't. It's like they're covering trails that we can't cover, right? And I love that perspective, because it really does change the flow. It's not just that you're a victim. It's not that the world or the universe is pummeling you because of something you've done wrong. There's none of that. It's just, this is what it is. And now how do you want to respond to it?
Yeah. What I've found, I've always been a fan of transpersonal psychology and depth psychology, and certainly beyond the eclectic therapeutic methods that we use, depth psychology, the mytho-poetic layer, Jungian perspectives on the mind certainly feature very much into what we do here. And case in point, I mean, Carl Jung, I mean, let's talk about the mind, right? The mind is like an iceberg, with the 10% above the water being the conscious mind, the 90% below the water being the unconscious. And what Carl Jung says is that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will play itself out in the world around you and you will call it your fate. And so we have many people show up down here, seemingly the victim of circumstances, malevolent forces in the world. Why is this always happening to me? Be it cycling through abusive relationships or addictions and whatever. And it turns out that certain events that happened in their young childhood or the way they were parented informed that position. It got relegated to the unconscious mind, into the shadow aspect of the personality. And one of the great things about psychedelic, which I know that you both know, is that it will bring this unconscious material out and it will present it to you. And now that you know how it arose and how it's been impacting your behaviors, it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube again. And so now is the time to move forward and make the changes that I know I can make, and to a degree began to take control of my life again, not in a control freak kind of way, but take charge of my life again, right? So yeah.
That's beautiful. I love this. And as I said at the beginning of the episode, because I couldn't talk to people about mushrooms because I was never met with any degree of welcome, I would talk to people about the insights that were behind mushrooms, the ability to relax and realize the thoughts in your head aren't the truth. That's the biggest thing. They're just thoughts. They're just possible perceptions. And you're holding on to them as truth is why you tense up, is why you're afraid. And so over time, and even with the podcast, we're encouraging people to question those assumptions, question that false certainty, question that comfort that goes with thinking that you know. And so it's the very same process, but it's self-driven. It's without the psychedelics. And so we find that, not just cannabis, because we have another mini series called Being High, where we talk about cannabis and talk to people in the cannabis industry, but with psychedelics, it's just the same conversation, because as an old friend said to me once, being high is synonymous with being relaxed. And I thought that was profound in the extreme, because that's all we're ever doing is resisting our relaxation. We want to feel like we're in control because we have no faith.
Right. And I would add that, the majority of people are way more in their heads than they realize it. If somebody has been through a trauma, be it a sexual trauma or otherwise, even more so, they do not feel safe in their bodies, so are even more in their heads. And many people, unfortunately, habitually identify with their thoughts, and they're either in the future or in the past. And when the majority of your thoughts are in the future or the past, they are weighing down on the present moment and giving you little capacity to enjoy the present moment. So when we get to target this default mode network in the brain, and all of that chatter and self-analysis and self-recrimination and the inner critic wears off, it allows us really much to be in the present moment as well, which is another fundamental aspect of the psychedelic experience.
Yeah, well said. Because and in the present moment, you're left in that uncertainty too. There's an experience of freedom, uncertainty, when you're just left with what is here and now, and that back and forth between striving for certainty or relaxing into uncertainty is, I think, so much of what freedom in general is about. And it's funny how certain substances can help inform, sort of assist, supplement that recognition. Things like cannabis and mushrooms, certainly psychedelic mushrooms, can assist in that. Whereas, in so much of our world these days, it's not about that at all. It's I know these things. I do know these things, and therefore I have to repress them. I have to suppress them. How am I going to do that? I'm going to use some other substances, like alcohol. I can find that down the street on any street corner, or SSRIs, which are very quickly prescribed to people because there's a lot of money to be made on that. But both of those are very much numbing agents. It's like it's settling upon that certainty, and then this is definitely the case, and therefore I have this perspective of it, and therefore I have to suppress these things, as opposed to something like weed and mushrooms. And there can be a discomfort in allowing for that, those sides of you to bubble up, and realizing, just despite all of that, how uncertain things are right now. But in that, there's that experience of faith that's found in yourself. And I think going through and experiencing mushrooms and just experimenting with mushrooms in my own life, I've definitely found that there's a perspective and shifts in my perspective that it allows me to see, but there's nothing about them that tell me that I need them. So I still will do them from time to time, you know, when we have our own retreats, but it's not something that I've consistently utilized anymore. A couple of years ago, I got into them and just became very curious because I was like, I've had this stigma throughout my entire life about this thing. I've been told it's illegal, it's a bad thing, it's a Schedule 1 drug, there's no medical benefit whatsoever. My mind was blown because I tried them for the first time. I think I took half a gram, and I was just like, you know, just kind of relaxed and really appreciative of life. And I was like, how are these illegal? But, you know, in a world where there's this illusion that control is something that we can have, you know, it makes sense that something that shows you that maybe that's not the case, but there's another experience there. There's the experience of freedom, the experience of faith in yourself right now. It's something that's very unexplored. And so it's always exciting to be able to talk to people who are recognizing that. Like, there's a different way to experience reality that isn't just striving on this trajectory towards, you know, the more I have, the bigger of an idea of myself that I have, the more positive of an idea of myself that I have, the more that I am. And so I have to keep striving until we get to death. And then it's like, well, what's my legacy going to be? And then we're able to continue that idea after death. We've actually been able to figure out how to try and do that. So there's never the point that we just relax into what we are. And like, I don't necessarily know what I am, and everything that's available to be explored there. So there's even beyond the healing components, there's an exploration. And then when it's not so much about, you know, me overcoming my own insecurities, we can start looking at reality and society and exactly.
So what I say, my observation is, it's not uniquely mine, I think it's commonly known, but it seems to me that there is an acute mental health crisis in the West, and it is becoming more acute with every generation, be that depression, be it anxiety, be it a genetic predisposition that you have towards any of those conditions that is then triggered by the environment that you're in as a child or older. If you have helicopter parents, if you have parents that are chronic worriers and full of anxiety, that's what they're modeling for you as a child. You are going to internalize that and carry it up into the world. And then the attempt is to try and control everything. And if you like, to try and throw a straitjacket over the future, which is completely counter to the nature of things as they are. Some of the interesting research, as you talk about the uncertainty of the future, is that there are the 5 cardinal psychological traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion through introversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. The interesting thing is that if you have a mystical experience on a therapeutic dose of psilocybin, it can increase your openness to new experience by up to 1 standard deviation compared to the population at large. What does that mean? It means more creative thinking, but also more ease with uncertainty and ambiguity as well. And we could all use a dose of that, that's for sure.
Absolutely. There was a study that I read recently. I don't know if you've heard this, but I'm sure that you'll appreciate it, where they showed a correlation between psychedelic use and a lack of overtime.
Yes. Yeah. There's a value shift that happens, isn't there? So I'm no longer willing to be as much on the hedonistic hamster wheel and a slave to the economy as I used to be. Yep.
Absolutely,
Yep.
because I am not so invested in this idea of myself that causes me to feel like I lack. So I must always be trying to be more. And then all of a sudden you realize you can't be more than what you are. You are what you are right now. And that's the one wonderful thing about psychedelics, is that, as you said, it strips the default mode, which means all it does is take you back to reality. And it's so funny that we find being in reality to be so incredibly profound. And it's only because we've been taught for a lifetime to think that the image of ourselves in our head is reality.
Mm. Yeah.
Just mind blowing. So it's very encouraging to me that you are out there, Justin, for sure. On a personal level, and I want to ask this because, again, 20 years I've been doing this on my own, going along the journey, as you know, just picking apart that nagging sensation that who I think I am is who I am. The experience of unity, and you covered this briefly in terms of the people who come to your retreats, just this ongoing recognition of That seems really appropriate. That can't be coincidence. And I was just thinking about that. And sometimes people echoing one another in that state of
Mm.
relaxation. How much has that influenced you as a person over the course of your life?
Okay, so good. Okay, um, I because I run a business in the world, I have to, part of me has to act in a very linear cause and effect fashion, right? You got to control the big moving pieces. But there's a big part of me where I would say I square the circle, right? That it's more Taoist in my approach, as in there is a meandering path through life, and not all of my good fortune and bad fortune in this present moment should be judged as good fortune or bad fortune, because I can't think of the amount of times in my life that I've suffered, either by virtue of my own creation or something happening. I thought, well, that's it. Game over for me. What am I going to do now? And a year later, I was in a much better position that I would never have arrived at had I not been through that otherwise most unfortunate circumstance a year ago where I thought it was game over for me. And that Taoist, if you like, that Taoist approach, I have to try and mix the linear with the Taoist and what I would call the yin with the yang. But rather than order and chaos, I refer to the chaos as the unknown. And I'm these days very comfortable with a foot in order and one foot in the unknown. And that's where I find I operate best.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I very much find the same is true with dualistic unity because, again, I've been
Yeah,
at this a long time, but the way I got here was through not trying to get here because that was the
yeah,
impact that I want to have is that you don't
yeah,
need to. Everything just unfolds. And so you start to find
yeah.
this sense of timing. You start to look at things, you're like, huh, that's an interesting conversation that just came out of nowhere. I'm going to pay attention to that
Yeah,
rather than, well, that's not the trajectory I had in mind. And it
yeah.
just changes your attitude towards things. That's fantastic. I really hope that at some point we can have you back on the show or get you into one of our group discussions because
Yeah,
it's
happy
really
to
all
join.
about the application of this in our day-to-day lives, whether you have psychedelics or not. The fact is that you can question your false certainty. You can question that narrative. You can question your belief that the narrative is comfort because that's really the
Yeah,
big problem. We think like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I'm afraid. Oh, comfort myself with thought. And it cuts us off from all of our ability to deal with reality, all of our ability to recognize how much we can change because that thought is stagnant.
yeah. Wholeheartedly agree. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And through that experience, there's this sensitivity that's sort of realized, I guess. And in that there's the realization, as you were kind of alluding to, opportunity in everything. Like it's not so much about what I think should be happening or shouldn't be happening. It's like whatever's happening is what's happening.
Is happening.
And like,
Yeah.
it's so
Yes.
funny how basic, like, the phrase "it is what it is." How many times I heard that growing up? It's like one of the most cliche things I've ever heard, but like how profound that is. And when I'm just paying attention to it without so much of an opinion, it's like there is this opportunity. It's not to say that everything gets neutralized. I still will have opinions come up about certain things, but the less attached and harshly I cling to that opinion, the more opportunity I see with every interaction. And there is
Yep.
sort of a willingness to find that balance between, a semblance of structure for communication purposes. Like for this call today,
Yep.
we scheduled a time and sent over a link and all that stuff.
Yep.
But once we got here, it's like, let's see what happens. So it's exciting to be willing to have that balance, because for a lot of my life, I was like, I got to be prepared. I got to be ready. I got to know what's going to happen. And if I don't know what's going to happen, then I don't have enough faith in
Yep.
myself to handle anything. And so there's a beauty in that realization of, no, I actually don't know. And I don't know what the best outcome is. I can have an idea of what I think is best for me, what
Yep.
I think is best based on my own preferences, but I
Yep.
don't really know what this thing and whether my preference or the thing that I don't want to happen is going to lead to. But it's going to lead to
Exactly.
something, and as long as I'm paying attention, like I'm going to be there
Exactly.
to actually find out. Right?
Yeah. But it takes a lot of courage and humility, because you cannot just know that between your ears and think it. You've got to know it inside this space as well, right? And if you're only acknowledging it intellectually and not in your entire body, if you're still riddled with anxiety about that outcome, but telling yourself that you shouldn't be, the more you can align the heart and the mind and be in that flow state, the more things line up as well, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the work, as it were. And
Yeah.
it's funny because the work is relaxing. And that's the contradiction, right? It's like you can't try to fight these thoughts. You're just enabling them. You're just making them stronger. You're fighting yourself. You're actually empowering the enemy of yourself, which isn't there. It's not
Yeah.
there. That's the trickiest part about it. You're fighting a phantom that's only real because you keep thinking it is. Right. And so it's really interesting. So, Justin, before we wrap up here, what are your hopes for Myco Meditations moving forward? Because for me, the retreats that we've hosted, the events that we do, the groups that this is all in the name of ripples itself, because enough ripples change the pond.
Yeah.
So, as you said, though, it's a business. You've got to have some kind of a trajectory. So, what is
Yeah.
yours?
So it was always our goal to try and develop what we hoped would be a gold standard for psilocybin-assisted therapy in a naturalistic environment, not inside some clinic with fluorescent lights. Okay. So with that in mind, we will remain boutique. It's not our goal to be the McDonald's of the retreat business. I do see us gradually, slowly expanding into maybe a couple of different states in the US in the coming years, maybe an operation in Europe as well. But at the end of the day, that the focus will be on very high outcomes and excellent safety and very experienced, well-trained clinicians and individuals working for us. I cannot make a phone call right now and say, hey, get me 5 new retreat leaders. They don't exist, or they've only had shamanic experience or some limited underground experience. So for us, we're just growing slowly, spending a lot of time on just training up our team members. And, they will come and go, and they go with our blessing. But I know that when they go out and they do their work in the US or other retreat centers, they'll be best in class, and they will take what they've learned to the rest of the world as well.
Absolutely. And that's it. Enough ripples change the pond. Every person that comes in and out of your life is changing, however much. And that's changing everything. Change is. It's not that things are changing. Things are changing. Right? Absolutely. So one last question, just because I'm curious. What strain of mushrooms are you using? Do you know?
Okay, so we use B+ down here. We've experimented with different strains. And, given that we're in a very tropical environment down here, there is a high risk of contamination. So we try and work with strains that we know are hardy and used to the tropics and humidity. So that removes a few. We've experimented. So B+ is what we work with, but it's particularly potent, B+, and we're always busy tweaking the substrate and sending them off to the lab. And then, of course, consuming a number of those ourselves, because I wouldn't expect our guests to use mushrooms that I and my team have not tried ourselves either as well. So the human touch is important as well in that respect, not just the lab.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. I've tried B+. Most of the time, I've utilized golden teachers in my experience, but yeah, definitely resonate with the utilization of them and the willingness to be in it yourself, because how much of the experience is you going through it too. And I've realized that with our own retreats, like, as much as we have this role of quote unquote hosts, like, I'm still going through the human experience as much as anyone else, and going through ups and downs in my own life. And I think there's a benefit to that. Like, I definitely built an idea in the past about overcoming everything, never going through shit anymore, reaching enlightenment and all that stuff. And I couldn't imagine a less helpful person than someone who's overcome all of their stuff.
Because if you were residing at the top of the mountain and that's where you stayed, right, you probably need to be served on hand and foot, because you could not exist in reality. Hence the need to come back down into the daily grind and now apply whatever you've learned for yourself and others. Completely agreed.
Absolutely. And then there's more of an appreciation for the things that I go through in my life, because it's informing all of my interactions. So
because you can come down from the mountain and the same assholes are going to be out there that know how to push your buttons. The same new challenges will arise, and we encourage our guests to lean into them and build resilience. And what is a challenge now, in 6 months will seem like a walk in the park, but you've got to lean in and you've got to have courage, and you've got to just push yourself a little bit and get out of your comfort zone, because outside your comfort zone, that's where the magic in life happens, not while you're stuck inside it.
Beautifully said. Absolutely. Justin, I want to say thank you again for joining us today. These conversations are powerful. They're transformative in themselves, because somebody is listening to this and this is the conversation they've been wanting to hear, or rather it's the conversation that facilitates whatever lessons that they've been working on. And so I really appreciate that you exist, that everything that you're doing with Myco Meditations continues to go on. I look forward to having you back on the show. Hopefully we can get you to one of our own retreats one day. We don't do high dosages such as that. We do long walks, as it were, through the experience, but it would be great to have you join us just to shoot the shit and get to know you a little bit more as a consciousness, as somebody who is sending ripples out into this collective reality. It's been a pleasure, Justin.
Thank you both, Ray and Steve, for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Time has flown by. I'm sure we could have talked for many hours more. So, but yeah, I'd love to take you up on the next invitation.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Yeah. Appreciate you joining us, Justin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'm excited for to hear potentially a little bit more about everything going on with Myco Meditations in the future. And I look forward to our next chat.
Whereabouts are you guys based?
I'm actually in Canada myself. Andrew is in the US. We're going to be going to the Netherlands in a few days to host a 9-day retreat there.
Nice.
And we've done a number of retreats on Vancouver Island, which is fairly psychedelic friendly, just because the police attitude towards psychedelics out here are kind of grows everywhere. So we can't really do anything about it. So, but again, it's different tone, different environment. We're very much talking about the community as opposed to those again, those parts of your life where you just need a good shake. You know, it's really nice to have that supportive environment. And so Myco Meditations is definitely serving a purpose for people who definitely need it. But in our community, sometimes we're just peeling away the layers a little bit at a time rather than those deep dives. But
and I really appreciate the work you do. There are some people that need exactly what you've got on offer at this stage of their life, and maybe something like this at a different stage. And now I know that you exist. I'm happy to, you know, our denial rate of applications is around about 32% for a variety of different reasons, because we just don't think they can handle the kind of doses that we will need to work on them down here. So I'm happy, though, as that the occasional one bubbles up that's maybe not a fit, to introduce them to you guys as well.
Likewise.
All right.
Absolutely. We have the same thing. Some people who are just looking for that deeper dose. And frankly, Andrew and myself running the retreat, we don't have that support where we feel comfortable offering them that opportunity. And so we're glad that we can offer them that opportunity to come and chat with you. Everyone, thank you for listening to this episode. It's been a wonderful conversation. Definitely check out season 1 of the podcast if you're looking for a psychedelic experience without the psychedelics. Justin, as always, this has been great. We will see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks ever so much.